Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at something truly, well, extraordinary and deeply tragic that happened recently. Picture a place of incredible natural beauty, vibrant culture, but sadly also a place overshadowed by decades of really deep-seated conflict.
Right. And then imagine a single event, something devastating that just cuts through all that noise.
Exactly. A moment so catastrophic, somehow briefly, almost miraculously, united communities that had been fiercely at odds for, gosh, what feels like an eternity.
It's such a powerful paradox, isn't it? It really shows how even the most profound sorrow can sometimes pull people together, even if it's just for a moment.
Absolutely. We're talking about June 12, 2025. An Air India flight crashed near Ahmedabad. And the shockwaves, they reached far beyond the crash site itself. It wasn't just another headline. This struck right at the heart of a state already, reeling from prolonged conflict.
Manipur. And among the lives lost, two young women, their stories for a brief time held up a mirror to the state's divisions, but then surprisingly seemed to show a potential way past them.
We should name them. Lamnantham Singson, she was 26, a nursing student from Kangpokpi, which is in the Kuki community area.
And Kongri Lapham Nanthoy Sharma, just 20 years old, a commerce student from Thubal, part of the Maite community.
Both so young, bright futures ahead of them.
Absolutely. And their deaths, you have to remember, this happened against a backdrop of conflict that's been going on intensely for over 2 years now, over 25 months.
The human cost has just been staggering. Over 260 lives lost, 60,000 people displaced. It's devastating.
It is. And yet this tragedy, this specific heartbreaking event, it somehow managed to momentarily bridge that ethnic divide, and divide that seemed, frankly, completely impenetrable.
So that's our central question for this deep dive. How could such an awful event create this temporary but undeniably powerful connection between groups locked in such a bitter struggle?
What does it tell us, really, about the potential for peace, even in places that seem utterly fractured?
We want to get beyond just the facts, understand the human response here.
Yeah, it taps into something fundamental about, well, human nature, I think. Our capacity for empathy, even when it seems dormant.
Okay, so to really grasp why that moment of unity was so significant, we first need to understand Manipur itself a bit better.
Right. The context is crucial.
It's a state in northeast India, incredibly beautiful, lush hills, really rich culture.
But also, as you said, scarred by internal strife. It's like, I've heard it described as a beautiful painting with a tear right down the middle.
Or like trying to have a picnic on a beehive. That captures that too.
Yeah.
Beautiful, but always that underlying tension.
It does. And the core conflict, it's mainly between the Maite community, who are predominant in the Imphal Valley, and the Kukizo communities, who mostly live in the surrounding hills.
And these tensions, they aren't new, are they? But they've really, really escalated since May 2023.
Dramatically. And the roots of the disagreement, they run deep. You're looking at disputes over land rights, which are always contentious, fierce competition for political representation, really deep questions about identity.
And that specific issue, the demand for scheduled tribe or ST status, that seems particularly explosive.
It is. It's a really dense web of grievances. Each thread pulled incredibly tight.
And you mentioned the roots go deep. How far back are we talking?
Well, you can trace elements back to pre-colonial times, but British colonial policies, well, they definitely intensified divisions. Whether it was intentional or not, they kind of created a hierarchy.
Favoring certain groups.
Generally, yes. Favoring the Maite community in many administrative aspects, which created structures and resentments that, still linger today.
And then post-independence.
That added more layers. Insurgencies, demands for autonomy from various groups. It just kept getting more complicated. Not one single cause, but the slow buildup over centuries.
Okay, so if the history is that long and complex, what was the immediate spark? The thing that set off this current wave of violence over the last couple of years?
The flashpoint was really a court order in March 2023. It suggested considering ST status for the Maites.
Right, and ST status comes with certain benefits, protections.
Exactly. Government benefits, land ownership rights in certain areas. So this proposal, it just ignited huge protests and then clashes, starting around May 3rd, 2023. And it's been simmering and flaring up ever since.
Which brings us back, tragically, to June 12th, 2025.
Yeah.
That Air India crash near Ahmedabad. You mentioned investigations are ongoing into the technical side.
Yes. As of early July 2025, they were still looking into the exact cause, likely some kind of technical failure, but beyond the mechanics of the crash.
It's the personal stories. Lamnantham and Nganthoy. They make it so much more than just a statistic.
They really do. Lemnantham Singson, 26, the nursing student. Her family described her as this kind-hearted dreamer, full of life, coming home for a family event.
And Ganthoy Sharma, just 20. Known for being a great student involved in extracurriculars, a vivacious soul apparently loved by so many.
It's two promising young lives, gone like that.
Their deaths really struck a chord, didn't they? In a state already just overwhelmed by turmoil, it was like this tragic mirror held up to the divisions.
But then something else happened. It also revealed this surprising capacity for unity, even if it didn't last. It really made you stop and think.
It did. It's strange, isn't it? How an event that took lives ended up, briefly, bringing people together when years of talks hadn't managed that.
Yeah. And what we saw right after the crash was, well, extraordinary is the right word.
Social media, for instance.
Yeah.
Usually in Manipur, it's described as a digital battleground, right? Hate speech flying back and forth.
Absolutely. Poisonous stuff, often. But after the crash, it just transformed. People started calling it a condolence concert.
Wow.
You had both mighty and kooky individuals, people who might normally be arguing online, posting messages of shared sorrow. Real empathy.
That's incredible. And it wasn't just online.
No, that was just the start. Then there was the gathering at Imphal airport. You could almost picture it. People from both communities standing together, their faces just etched with grief, holding joint prayers.
A sight you wouldn't normally see.
A sight many thought was impossible. Like, cats and dogs sharing a meal, Unexpected, heartwarming in a sad way, but ultimately, as we saw, fleeting.
That moment, though, where raw human empathy seemed to just cut through the usual toxicity. It felt like a powerful, even if temporary, bridge.
It showed that recognition of shared humanity, didn't it? In the face of just terrible loss. It reminds you that deep down, maybe that potential for connection is always there.
A beautiful, if tragic, glimpse of what could be.
Exactly. But then reality bites back, doesn't it? The harsh realities of the conflict resurfaced very quickly.
How so? What happened next?
Well, the real test came almost immediately. Even with something as basic, as solemn, as transporting the victims' bodies home for their final rites.
The conflict affected even that.
Profoundly, it just highlighted the stark practical divide. Because of the violence, Lamantham Singson's body, remember she's from the Kuki community.
Right from Gangpokpi.
Her body couldn't be transported directly through the usual routes. It had to be flown to Dimapur Airport first in Nagaland.
Which is how far from Gangpokpi?
About 200 kilometers. A significant detour, adding complexity and delay to an already painful process.
Well, and Ganthoy Sharma's body.
Her body from the Meitei community went directly to her home in Thubal.
Wow. So this logistical nightmare, this unavoidable difference in their final journeys.
It was just this immediate, stark reminder. Despite the shared grief at the airport, the conflict's grip was still incredibly strong. It affected the most basic, solemn customs. That airport unity felt like a candle in a storm, really. Powerful, but vulnerable.
This whole episode, this temporary unity, it really makes you step back and think, doesn't it? I kept thinking about John Paul Lederach and his concept of moral imagination.
Yes. The capacity to envision peace even when you're deep in conflict.
Exactly. And for that brief time in Manipur, it wasn't just an idea, it felt real. People were living it for a moment.
And that brings Johan Galtema's ideas to mind, too, about negative peace versus positive peace.
Can you remind us what the difference is?
Sure. Negative peace is basically just the absence of direct violence. The fighting stops, but the underlying issues aren't resolved.
Okay.
Positive peace is much deeper. It includes social justice, harmony, resolving the root causes of conflict. It's about building strong, equitable relationships.
So Manipur, even at its best recently, is maybe experiencing a very fragile negative peace.
At best, yes. Very fragile. The aspiration, the real need, is for that positive peace, but that feels, well, still quite distant.
But this moment of unity, even though prompted by tragedy, maybe it hints at something deeper, something beyond just a pause in fighting.
I think it absolutely does. It connects with Steven Pinker's idea, too, about our better angels.
Our capacity for empathy, for reason.
Right. The things that Pinker argues have generally led to less violence over the long sweep of history. That compassionate response after the crash, people from both sides mourning together. It really felt like those better angels were at work.
Like finding a silver lining in a very, very dark cloud.
It showed that innate drive towards connection, I think.
Which is hopeful. But it brings us to the really hard question. Can that last? Was it a real shift or just a momentary blip, a hiccup in this long, bitter argument?
And that's the crux of it, isn't it? That's the huge challenge, because even with that glimpse of unity, the deep-rooted issues driving the conflict haven't gone away.
The land disputes, the political representation battles, the economic disparities, they're all still there.
Exactly. Until those foundational problems are genuinely tackled, lasting peace is going to be incredibly difficult to achieve. It requires more than just shared grief.
In the role of government in this, it's critical, surely. There's been criticism of the state government, Chief Minister N. Biren Singh, about perceived bias.
Yes, there has been significant criticism and immense pressure. It's vital that governance is seen as impartial. And the central government has a huge responsibility, too, to ensure fairness and facilitate a neutral process.
And in the short term, what needs to happen right now?
Well, immediate needs are paramount. Relief for the tens of thousands displaced, ensuring basic security, preventing more violence, those are non-negotiable first steps.
But looking longer term, what does a real peace process look like?
Oh, it's a massive task, like trying to, I don't know, rebuild your house during a hurricane. It needs a comprehensive, inclusive peace process,
Being
meaning you have to involve all the key players, civil society groups, religious leaders from both communities, crucially, the youth, they're the future. It needs immense political will, sustained dialogue, which will be very difficult, and a real commitment from everyone to bridge these divides.
So after this tragedy, you kind of see two ways of looking at it. The skeptics.
Right. The skeptics will look at how quickly things reverted, the logistical problems with the bodies, and say, see, it was just a fleeting moment. Nothing fundamental changed.
And they have a point, based on the immediate aftermath.
They do, but then there are the optimists. Or maybe the hopeful realists?
Who might see it differently.
Who might see it as, perhaps, a seed. A potential starting point planted in what's been very barren ground for a long time. A reminder of that shared humanity, that capacity for connection.
A glimpse of what's possible.
Exactly. And the future really hinges on whether Manipur's leaders and its people can somehow use this tragic moment not just as a memory, but as a catalyst. A catalyst for genuine, lasting change. It's a profound choice they face.
So wrapping up our deep dive today, the core lesson seems to be how those tragic deaths, Lamnantham Singson and Kongbralatpam Nganthoy Sharma, on June 12, 2025, they created this brief, almost unbelievable moment of unity.
It really showed us that shared humanity can pierce through the armor of conflict, even if just for a short time.
It's a powerful testament to empathy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it leaves us, and maybe you listening, with a question to reflect on.
What if tragedy, in its rawest form, doesn't just reveal our vulnerability, but actually reveals our deepest capacity for connection?
And if that's true, how do we nurture that flicker? How do we help it become a lasting flame? There's that quote from Martin Luther King Jr. seems so relevant here.
We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools.
For Manipur, and maybe in different ways for all of us, the choice really couldn't be clearer.